We cover here gender, sex, and sexuality, the fluidity of maleness and femaleness. These slides come from our text, the publishers of our text, asking questions about cultural anthropology, and also from my own research and information. This comes from chapter 10 of our text. And some of the questions we'll be covering include how and why do males and females differ? Why is there inequality between men and women? What does it mean to be neither male nor female? And is human sexuality just a matter of being straight or queer? The image that you see here on this slide that during the Liberian Civil War, there were rebels who cross dressed, and it's a representation of a subtle expression of alternative masculinity and warriorhood. In this chapter, we're concerned with how the relations of gender and sex shape people's lives. And in response to that, we are going to cover these objectives to identify cross cultural variations in gender linked behaviors, to understand the limits of a sex gender dichotomy, and clarify the biocultural basis of male and female differences and similarities, clarify and assess arguments about men being the quote stronger unquote sex and women being the weaker quote unquote sex, and describe the gender identities and sexualities of people who are neither male nor female. If we ask the question, how and why do males and females differ, we can begin by talking about gender, or what it means to be a man, woman, or other identity, as well as sex and sexuality are as artificially constructed as any other aspect of culture. And the thing that's always interesting many times to students is the fact that many cultures don't share Western culture's basic male female, man woman, straight queer dichotomies. The role of biology is most discernible among young children. As children get older, cultural influences on behavior become much stronger, and it becomes difficult, if not possible, to isolate biological influences on what it means to be male or female. A sexually dimorphic species, when compared to other primates, humans are moderately dimorphic. Anthropologists sometimes use the term chromosomal sex because males have X and Y chromosomes and females have two X chromosomes. But dichotomies between the sexes do break down and blur. Men have testes, a penis, and various internal structures and hormones that support the delivery of urine and semen. Secondary effects of these hormones include deep voices, facial hair, and in some cases, pattern baldness. Females have ovaries, hormones, and an internal structure such as fallopian tubes that support the movement of ova, pregnancy, and fetal development, and whose secondary effects include breast development and a high voice. When we start to talk about intersex, we know that as many as 1.7% of the live births in the United States may be intersex, and that there are some cultures that are more accepting than others. In the European and North American societies, there's a more there are more rigid sex boundaries, considering intersex a disorder that requires surgical correction. Sex assignment surgeries are intended to help individuals fit in, but sometimes they do more harm than good, especially when infants grow up and do not associate with the sex that was chosen for them at birth. Sex assignment surgeries literally construct genitals on the basis of cultural expectations about not natural variation in appropriate ways genitals are supposed to look. If we look at the images that are on this slide, these are from a 2009 rally urging the International Olympic Committee to reject discrimination against athletes suspected of being intersex who participate in international sporting. If we explore the role of hormones, testosterone does play a larger role in male bodily function, and estrogen a larger role in female bodily function. But both males and females produce both of these hormones in variable quantities. Behavioral characteristics like aggression, dominance, and violence are psychologically complicated and expressed in specific cultural contexts. They are not reducible to hormones. One of the questions that anthropologists and other social scientists have dealt with for a very long time is why is there inequality between men and women? Why do men, with very few exceptions, hold the leadership roles in societies? In the Victorian era, anthropologists began to question whether all societies treated women as unequally as Euro American societies did. But the question never got very far until Simone de Beauvoir's book, The Second Sex, spurred a wave of feminist anthropology in 1949. This is her pictured here. Most feminist anthropologists agreed that cultural ideologies and social relations played a greater role in gender inequality than biological differences. To talk about some of the relatively recent debate over sexual inequality, in the 1970s and 80s, we saw an ongoing debate over the universality and causes of inequality. Some argued that inequality was universal owing to some basic associations. These associations included women with nature and the domestic sphere, and men with culture and the public sphere. Others argued that inequality was not so fundamental, but rather a result of specific historical processes like capitalism and colonialism. The unresolved debate gender inequality is not a thing, but a process. It's important to refocus on how a given process is performed and reproduced. If we talk about masculinity, ideas of masculinity do not inherently promote sexism or male dominance. That masculinity is something to be attained is pervasive in many cultures. The notion that women are born, or nature, and men are created, culture, helps explain the importance of male initiation rites in so many societies. If we look at the image on this slide, in recent years, there have been some broad social transformations, such as greater numbers of women working outside the home for money, boys and girls in schools being given equal status, and the feminist movement. Those have all contributed to the changing perceptions of manhood across the United States, including the acceptance of men's greater involvement in parenting. There have been some shifts in the idea or trends of male dominance. The relationship between masculinity and male dominance changes through time. For example, Matthew Gutmann's research in Mexico City shows Mexican masculinity to be more dynamic than stereotypes of inflexible, domineering machos suggest. We see his book, The Meanings of Macho, which reflect his research. Specific factors include more women work outside the home for money, boys and girls have equal status in schools, and also the global feminist movement and its influence.